The motivation maybe on Abkhazian side is to be left alone, while the motivation on Georgian side is to get reintegrated.
They will always fight for their freedom, also with weapons. But they are really fed up with war.
მოგესალმებით. სტუდია რე და მე მამუკა ყუფარაძე გთავაზობთ.
Hello, my name is Mamuka, it's a studio area. We are talking about 25-year-long process of civil dialogue between Georgian and Abkhazian sides because we have conflicts, and also we are talking about people meeting from time to time here and there, abroad and in other places, with support of different people who are mediating and facilitating this process, and quite often the success of these meetings and success of this dialogue depends on the skills and competence of people who are leading it. Now today we have a guest, one of the most successful peaceful dialogues, and he's the representative of Berghof Foundation.
Bhatoni Oliver Volle.
So hello, let me welcome you and thank you very much for coming.
Გამარჯობა.
Bhatoni Oliver, ჩვენთვის და ჩვენი მაყურებლისთვის.
So it's very interesting for us and for our audience if you would be so kind as to acquaint us with specifics of your foundation's activities.
Yes, maybe I say something first about the Berghof Foundation in general. We were founded 50 years ago in Berlin, in the middle of the Cold War. Yeah, at that time, many people feared that the Cold War could escalate into an atomic war, and in Germany there was a need for more research, for more investigations about this conflict. When the Cold War came to an end, the Berghof Foundation changed and started to work on many conflicts in the world. Yeah? I personally, for instance, joined as a student the Berghof Foundation 28 years ago, and today I'm one of the directors leading the Europe section.
ჩვენთან საქართველოში თქვენ ხელმძღვანელობთ, თქვენი ფონდი ხელმძღვანელობს ქართულ-აფხაზურ დიალოგს.
So I would like to tell our audience that in Georgia, Berghof Foundation is leading the dialogue process between Abkhazians and Georgians. That groups are being formed in Georgia and in Abkhazia respectively. They are being acquainted with each other's positions, opinions, maybe some texts are being exchanged between them, and thus prepared, then they meet, either remotely through internet or maybe elsewhere in some third country, coming to this meeting already prepared.
ჯგუფები აწარმოებენ ერთმანეთში დიალოგს. ბატონო ოლივერ, რამდენმა
So, Mr. Volle, can you tell us how many people did participate in this activity already? Do you differentiate them by age? Does age matter at all? Do you make any difference between age groups, and how many meetings did take place already?
Yes, Mamuka, our process really became very big in the last years. Just to give some figures, since last year, since the beginning of 2021, we conducted at least 2,300 dialogue meetings within Georgia, on the Georgian side, and about 800 such meetings on the Abkhaz side. That means we are having two parallel processes that are running. Actually, I should say now what we are doing in these discussion groups, but to come up to the figures about on the Georgian side in these 2 years, in this 1.5 years, we had more than 20,000 participants. And you are right, when the groups have developed and feel like it's the moment to meet, we are connecting them since the pandemic a lot in Zoom, but also in real life if it's possible. And we had about 300 such Georgian Abkhaz meetings in the last 2 years. Yeah, and maybe last thing on figures, at every meeting there are at least 8 to 10 to 12 participants at the meeting, plus our moderators and facilitators.
სტატისტიკა ძალიან საინტერესოა, მაგრამ
Since we are done with facts and figures, let me ask the next question. What kind of challenges, but maybe at the same time opportunities, does this dialogue face?
When it comes to the challenges, let me start with the challenges on the Abkhaz side. After the Georgian-Abkhaz War, in the years that followed, the Abkhaz society in general is very, very skeptical and was very skeptical about any relations and contacts with Georgians or with Georgia. So confidence-building measures or meetings with Georgians was and is still not a very popular thing. And there are quite a number of normal established formats and established methods peace builders are usually using. What could this be? This is let's use meetings between youth, meetings between women, yeah, maybe little cooperation projects, small business arrangements, things like that. Also very popular usually as human rights. Then you can do human rights of specific groups, of children, of women, whatever it is. I can only repeat that a very big challenge is that the Abkhaz society as such is very skeptical about these approaches. You often hear that they are saying, okay, the internationals and the Georgians are taking our youth. You know, they take them to Europe. And then they influence them, they try to, you know, get them on their side. Yeah? Yeah. And another aspect is that Abkhazia is much smaller than Georgia. And there is a structural challenge, and this is if 100 Abkhaz meet 100 Georgians, then in terms of proportion, Abkhazia gives a lot. And organizers always make meetings, and they always say, we take 10 Abkhaz and we take 10 Georgians. On the one hand, this is of course a symbol of equality. On the structural level, it only shows that, you know, Georgia must only send a few people and then they have met all the Abkhaz. And I think Western organizers and donors must be creative to exactly find an answer to these structural differences and challenges. But there is another very important element that is a challenge in Abkhazia and for peace building. These methods, these normal methods I described, you know, the youth or business, yeah, these are initiatives that relate to the future. Many Georgians are saying, and the organizers of such events are saying, let's forget about the past. Let's look into the future. However, the war and the violence in Abkhazia was so large and so significant that the Abkhaz society is not willing just to look into the future with Georgia. And in this lies also a great chance, a great opportunity.
მეტი პასუხისმგებლობით უნდა მივიღოთ აფხაზების მცდელობა.
So it was very well explained. The motivation of Abkhazian society was very well explained by you, and I found it very interesting. And it might seem that we should treat the readiness and preparedness of some Abkhazians to participate in this dialogue with more responsibility. And it's interesting to underline that the motivation maybe on Abkhazian side is to be left alone, while the motivation on Georgian side is to get integrated again or get reintegrated. So probably it's a branch of art to get people who are following such different vectors, to get people who are motivated in so different directions to sit together, and it requires maybe some separate or specific set of skills to do so.
Yes, I totally agree. As you also just said, the challenge in the Georgian society is they want to look into the future, you know, and integrate the Abkhaz into this. And they don't want to think about the past. This is a challenge on the Georgian side. One must also say that, of course, many donors, Western European donors, have a very limited understanding of the situation here. And therefore they are encouraging and financing very easily initiatives that look good and saying, you know, let's look into a positive, peaceful future. To summarize, we can say, while the Abkhaz society looks into the past and the Georgian society looks a lot into the future. But there is also something that is connecting them, or that can connect them. And this is the experience of the war and the violence. It was experienced a lot in Abkhazia, but also many Georgians were affected by this war. So basically all the people who were living during the war in Abkhazia, have this war emotionally and psychologically on their mind. And the Berghof process, our work, puts exactly this into the center of the discussions. This is a topic which also interests Abkhaz, and this is a topic Abkhaz also like to discuss with Georgians. And besides this question of what happened in 1992 and 1993 and why did this war start, the big question in the room is, will the war happen again? And so our discussions are never only about the past, our discussions are also about today.
ხშირად გავიგონებთ ხოლმე რომ მოდი ნუ
So actually many people working in the peace building field, they tend to follow the rule of let us leave history to the side, let us not touch the past, because it's quite often biased depending on who's telling the story. So let us turn the new leaf, let us start anew, and so on and so forth. But you just giving this example gave me a new insight into why it is important to discuss history in order to build the future on the past, so to say.
გადააზრება გვაძლევს საშუალებას ვიყუროთ წინ.
Absolutely, and maybe I should say a few sentences of how we do it. Our teams in Abkhazia and on the Georgian side are doing many interviews with people, lifetime interviews, biographical interviews. And we take then audio files, 5, 6, 7 minutes, and we are cutting them out and then creating a group that is listening to this 7 minutes and discuss it. This can be everything. It can be stories from before the war, when the war started, during the war, after the war. It can be everything. And in these groups, in the beginning, the Abkhaz groups are discussing Abkhaz stories, and the Georgian groups discuss Georgian stories, because this is very interesting. Yeah? We learn a lot about the relationships before the war. And there are also, Mamuka, every Georgian who is younger than 40 does not remember hardly anything from Abkhazia. So these younger generations can learn a lot about the Soviet Union and how was life in Soviet Union and how the war started. And of course, after some weeks, some months of work, the groups are asking us, do you have episodes from Abkhazia? Yeah, and of course, we have them. And we are giving it into the hands of our trained moderators and trained facilitators. And the beauty is, and I would really call it beautiful, is these groups are learning to listen to these memories in a very respectful way. I would really say we manage to create a space of respect and mutual listening. It is a difficult process, yeah, and sometimes many emotions, yeah. But the participants are Georgian participants are respectful to Georgian episode, and they are respectful to Abkhaz episode. And the same applies to the groups on the Abkhaz side. If it wouldn't be the case, we wouldn't do it. This is a great opportunity. Georgian and Abkhaz can talk about the past in a respectful way, and they can relate to each other's pain. And by this, they can discuss also political issues. Because it's in a way very simple, like in this discussion. If you have learned to discuss respectfully, you can just continue it with every topic. But I would like to highlight, we've done thousands of such workshops without the Abkhaz and Georgians meeting. Yeah? It's a parallel process. And maybe another element is, this is not a process for youth. This is a process for young and old people, because the old people who experienced the war are of course also in our groups and reporting about their experiences. It is a mistake often taken by organizers to separate young and old. Yeah, we call it intergenerational dialogue.
So I would say that Georgian society is quite often falling victim to stereotypes, and I dare say that Abkhazian society would follow the same route, I guess. So is it often that older people would change their mindset, not only young people who are open, maybe open-minded, but also old people who are set in their ways? Have you ever seen them changing their mindset or breaking some stereotypes?
This change is affecting all age groups. There is no distinction between young and old. But we can say for the older generation, it is emotionally more difficult. It could be also that older people, we have many war veterans in our process. They were directly involved in the war. The younger people, only know nothing about the war. It's a difference, of course. And one thing is clear, the situation in the Soviet Union, the situation that led to the war itself, is a very, very complex, dynamic. And what this process is, it's like a big magnifying glass. You see, you must see, the groups are for 2 hours discussing an interview of 5 minutes. And we learn a lot, and everybody learns a lot of how did the school in Abkhazia work? How was the relationship between Abkhaz, Armenian and Georgian teachers? How did hospitals work? How were friendship? Marriage? Everything. And we often call it's like a big mosaic. Every episode is a stone in this big mosaic. And the group, it takes time to see a picture. But people, I can say, are really, it gives something to them, because they are coming over and over again. Otherwise, it would not be possible that we are doing thousands of workshops.
It's a very widespread opinion in Georgian society in general that, but for Russians, there would have been no conflict with neither Abkhazians nor Ossetians, that this conflict has been forced upon us by some third party. I know that this is not so. I know that even if we get Russia out of this equation, there would be still some matter for conflict between us.
I think the Russian factor is part of this mosaic. There was and is a Russian element. And I agree with what you said. Even if Russia would disappear today, we would still have a lot of issues here and things to discuss. And all this is happening in the discussions. It's in the discussions in Abkhazia, in the discussions in Georgian side, but also in the discussions together.
Another
question would be what kind of external factors are influencing your process. For instance, I can give an example of war in Ukraine, very unjust and unfair war waged by Russia against Ukraine. Did it change things at all? How are members of your discussion groups reacting, if differently or if similarly, or in which way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, the Ukraine war has a big impact on all of us. Not just here in the Caucasus, also in Europe, but in our process, of course, too. The Ukraine war created a lot of fear. The fear also that Russia could attack you again. And on the Abkhaz side, the Ukraine war also creates fear. But the fear is, now that Russia is busy in Ukraine, now maybe the Georgians will attack Abkhazia. Everybody is always fearing his big neighbor. And although Ukraine situation and war is a total catastrophe, it also created something very interesting. For instance, we see very clearly today that Georgia does not plan to attack Abkhazia or attack Ossetia. As I said, in our workshops, 20,000 Georgians were, and I would say not one single advocated war against Abkhazia. But today we see that the whole Georgian society does not want war and wants a peaceful solution of the conflicts. Besides that, your president and your prime minister Prime Minister Garibashvili has said at least 4 or 5 times that Georgia will not attack Abkhazia or Ossetia. I think, as an analyst and peace builder, this is a very beautiful message to the people in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. It shows them that Georgia has changed a lot and has problems, but will not use war against them. That's super. We all know that there has been also some Ukrainians coming to Georgia or people advocating this. This is an opportunity to attack. But it was rejected by the people of Georgia and by your politicians.
What your explanation in your capacity of an analyst would be then that in this unjust war, Abkhazians and Ossetians are still siding with Russia or tend to side with Russia more.
Yes, politically they are tending to side with Russia more. Correct. But as a political observer, I would say there is no big enthusiasm. I think we have something very special in the Abkhaz society. They will always fight for their freedom, also with weapons. But they are really fed up with war. They don't want it. They look, the Abkhaz society, and also the Georgian maybe now, looks with empathy if there is a war in Karabakh. It's again no enthusiasm, it's empathy. And I also think they feel very sorry for the people in Ukraine. Because Abkhazia is so small and because the Georgian-Abkhaz war was fought in Abkhazia, they are very sensitive to the whole costs of war. But this applies also now a lot to the Georgian society.
By the end of this very interesting interview, unless we forgot anything, I would like to ask whether your doors are open to anybody who knocks on them. If anybody would wish to come and take part in these discussion groups, are they welcome?
Absolutely, they are absolutely welcome. These are not closed groups. We can create new groups. We are calling it a snowball system. The snowball becomes always bigger.
Thank you
very much for this interesting interview.
დიდი მადლობა.
მე მგონი საინტერესო იყო ეს საუბარი, ბევრი რამ
I believe our conversation has proven itself to be quite interesting. We learned a lot that might be of use in peaceful resolution of conflicts. But now it's time for a farewell and hope to see you soon again.